Hello, Dave Morelli here. It's the heat of the summer and it's getting to be crunch time to get my trapping stuff ready. And I started thinking about it. I'm one of the trapper ed instructors. Idaho went to, you have to have trapper's ed to buy a trapper's license if you hadn't had one before 2011, I believe it is. Anyway, I've done several classes over the last, since they started that. And what I find up here is a lot of times when we do the classes, the ground's froze up, it's snowing, it's raining, it's muddy, it's messed up. So when we go to do the actual demonstration part of it, it falls short because of the weather. Now I realize you should be able to do all this stuff in nasty weather, but for your new trappers, it's hard to do all this stuff. It's nice to learn how to do it in good conditions first, and then you can go and modify. So what I thought I'd do is I do a series of Trapper Ed videos. I'm going to label them that way in my playlist. And they'll be everything from cleaning your traps up, getting them ready, fixing them, tuning them, to setting up your truck. And this time of the year is when I make my wax dirt, which then that'll involve showing how to defeat the weather a little bit and keeping your traps working all the time. So we're gonna put that together, and we're gonna drink Black Rifle coffee while we're doing it, and hopefully it'll do y'all some good. And so let's get with it. Since how this is the time of the year, this is crunch time. It's actually a little late. This is when I start getting my traps cleaned up from last year and getting things together. I start doing some scouting. I still have some traps out that were frozen. They're on private ground. They're snapped off, but I need to go collect some of those up. It's only about a half a dozen, or about a dozen traps, and we'll go out and pull them here one day. But this is a good time for me to kind of show you what traps I use and what I use them for and why. And nowadays I prefer 3s and 4s coil spring traps, and I want them modified with all the stuff, and I'll show you what I mean. But that doesn't mean I don't use 2s and traps and long spring traps. I use what I have, and I get as many sets out as I can, or I have time for. So they're not all necessarily my favorite traps, but they're traps that I use, and they're traps that have worked for years. What I want to start with is one of the first traps I've ever used. And this is a Northwoods number 2. It is exactly how I bought it, other than I tuned the trigger. And I'll show you how I tune triggers on one of the videos coming up. It's a number 2 single coil trap, and it's center swiveled, but it's not a great center swivel setup. And back in those days, there wasn't as many outfits selling stuff, so a lot of my swivels are made out of pipe that was cut and nails to make the rivets. And I made my swivel hoops, and then I had a place where I could pick up rebar, and so I flattened one end and put a washer on it. And this was my coyote trap for a lot of years when I first started. I keep this one around because when I do demos, because the springs are weak and it's old, it's easier for me to set for doing demos. But this trap, as it sets, caught a lot of coyotes and fox, and a few cats. So that was what I started with. Now I have this here is a this is number 2 Northwood style trap. However, this one's been modified, and what I mean by modification, it has laminated jaws, It's 4 coils, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's been base plated to make the base plate stronger and center swiveled. I have regular swivels that I bought, and it was tuned. I tuned the trigger. This one has to be, this one come out of the ground this year, so it has to be tuned a little. But it's ready to wire brush and tune, check everything, and set it and snap it a couple times, and it's ready to go into the dye bath. I like this trap. This trap's caught a lot of critters for me. But nowadays, where I trap with the threat of frozen ground and things of that nature, and ground getting stiffer, it's not necessarily frozen where it'll stop the trap, but I like the 4 coil to break through that frozen ground, and it makes them a little faster. So these days, I like the number 3. It's a little bit bigger jaw, and 4s. I have mostly 3s, but I do have some 4s. Same thing with the modification. It's got the laminated jaw, 4 coil, center swiveled and base plated. You can buy these already done, or you can do it yourself if you want to save a little money. I'm not sure how much money you save in time. And one of the things I like is I put a lot of swivels. Put a swivel up by the trap, put a swivel down at the bottom, and this one doesn't have it, but nowadays I also center swivel the chain. I don't want that to get bound up. This chain I used, I don't like using this chain anymore. It binds up, so, but this one has it on it, so I like the machine link chain better. This type. You can see it doesn't get, it doesn't have all the edges to get bound up. This is a coyote trap, even though it's a number 3 long spring. I have several long springs. This one still has the screen on it. If you're going to use long springs, if you get a good deal on a bunch of old long springs, they make a really good trap. As I can see, I base plated this, center swiveled it, as long as the springs are still good. And then one of the things that I like to do with them is put a Positrip pan on it. And Positrip pan gives you the option of tuning the trap and setting your pan tension. I set my pan tension for coyotes at about 5 pounds. 5 pounds seems to keep rabbits and smaller critters out of my traps, and still go off for coyote. I like the long springs more for cat trapping nowadays, mainly because I don't bed my cat traps in dirt. I set them bare, and the long spring has 3 points to steady the trap and to bed it without putting it in dirt. And so I like these for cat trapping. Normally on coyotes, I stake my traps unless I can't. There's some places this ground you can't get a stake in. When you're cat trapping, most of the ground is frozen by the time the season opens, so stakes aren't going to work. I like using drags for my cats, and they'll drag off a little ways and get tangled up. A lot of times I tie the drag up close to the set. They're usually right there when I get there. They don't fight as hard as a coyote does. When I'm coyote trapping, I got a lot of traps out. I don't want to go look for a coyote. They will break free and go get hung up, sometimes 100 yards away. And if they're not dancing around, it takes a while to find them. And it's hard to check 100 traps a day when you're searching for your coyote every set. So this one's set. I like them staked, and I like them right there. And I'm holding the pan up so it won't go off on me. And the first thing I do is get some of this dirt. It used to be mud, and it's dried. And it comes off pretty easy with a wire brush. So, roll that off, because you're going to dye and wax them. You want that off so it adheres to the metal. Last year I used some of Andy Stowe's the gasoline mix stuff, and it really kept my traps from rusting better. Problem with it is, the only problem that I have with it is, you can't use the trap right away. After you dip it, it's got to sit for several weeks for that to dry. Now I noticed that they make stuff that's not gasoline based, it's water based. I've never tried that. I don't know how that works. All I know is the gasoline stuff this year, it's the first time I ever used it, and it worked well. It worked as advertised, and I didn't notice anything shy away because of the odor, which there is none if you let them hang. So, but I've always been a dye and wax type guy, and if you're going to use calcium chloride to help frost-proof your trap sets, I would go with the gasoline mixed stuff because it protects them better. Anymore, wax dirt is the holy grail nowadays for bedding your traps in, and I'm using that more and more and more. So hopefully I won't have as much of a rust problem as using the calcium chloride. I'm going to show you how to make that stuff in an upcoming video, so stay tuned. Anyway, we get this off, and I've set this trap. Everything looks to be in line. I want you to listen. See, now I've got this set in such a way. You hear that click in? When that clicks in, my pan is level, and it's ready to go. I kind of tune my traps like a gun sear, and when it clicks in, the next 5 pounds, and this one actually has pretty good pressure. You can get a scale to measure 5 pounds. If you have one for your rifle, you can hook it underneath and pull it, a trigger feel. 5 pounds is what I like. I've gotten to the point where I know what 5 pounds feels like, and so this one is pretty much ready to boil and dye. So it goes over into the good pile. This one has a little bit, dig up another one, rust on it, and so we'll get that off of there. The logwood crystal dye, or if you use sagebrush to dye your traps and get the scent out of them, it needs a little rust. If you have brand new traps and you put them into the dye bath, the first time they'll get a little bit blacker, but they won't turn completely black. So a little rust is good. I try to get the loose rust off, and I leave the brown base on there, and that'll help hold the dye and the wax. So, and this one again is tuned. Let's see, oh, there we go. Now it's ready to, got a flat pan, and it has about 5 pounds. And then I like the trigger to be clean. A lot of times it gets a little blob of wax there. So after you're done dyeing and waxing them, you should knock that blob off there so it sets good. I've always said that I lead by bad example, which will tie into, you can learn from my mistakes. Last year I didn't dump this out when the wax was still hot, so I had to scrape all the old wax and stuff off and the rust. If I'd have dumped it out when it was hot, it would have been as big a mess. When I lived in up in North Idaho, it was wet all the time, most of the time, and I would do this on an open fire. I had a big barrel, it wasn't cut off, and you can cut this barrel off a little taller or whatever you want. This is what I ended up using, and so now I live where there's, in the mountains where there's all sagebrush, and by the time I get around to doing this, it's dry, and I don't want to take a chance with an open fire. So I use the propane burner. It works really well for me. These burners are about $40, and they last for a long time. And I just put that on there, fill it up with water, and I get it to start boiling while I'm working on my traps. And about the time I get a dozen or a dozen and a half traps ready to go in there, it's boiling, and I put the logwood crystals. Nowadays I use a lot of sagebrush inside there too to dye the traps and get the metal scent out of it. Logwood crystals work. And then I'll put the wax right on top of the water, and it'll float there. It'll melt and float. And as I pull the traps out, it coats them with wax. And then I'll put them on a table and let them cool. And after that, they only get touched with a gloved hand. And I'll put them in boxes that I take out on the trap line with me. But up until then, I don't worry about using gloves. But after they're dyed and waxed, then I only use gloves to move them around because I don't want to get any scent on the metal. Anyway, one of the reasons I'm doing this video is I'm trying to break in a new camera. The old camera took a dump on me, and I've got some issues I got to work out, and I'm hoping that this video will work some of them out. I plan on doing videos, making sets, cat sets, coyote sets, predator type sets, and probably do a little bit of water sets also for rats and beaver as the time comes. I'm going to do a video on making wax dirt. Wax dirt is the holy grail now for bedding traps. I used to use calcium chloride a lot. Calcium chloride works, but it rusts your trap, and especially in this climate where stuff stays wetter, the wax dirt sheds the water, and it seems to work really well. I use mostly wax dirt for everything, and I make enough to bed all my sets for the season. So I'm going to show you how to do that too. Anyway, stick with me. This is the Trapper Ed version of our trapping adventures. So I'll see you next time.